So today we're going to cover a topic related to health, strengths, and aesthetic training. The key differences, understanding how important it is to define your goals, and so on and so forth. So for myself specifically, I would always plan my year differently according to the season of the year and how fit or fat or sluggish I feel, and so on and so forth. I don't need to get any stronger anymore. I'm like way past my teenager years. There's only so strong you need to be before it becomes detrimental for your health. So, do you want to open up about defining training goals? Probably would be the first one. Understanding the differences between training for, let's say, health, strengths, aesthetics, or maybe they are all the same.
Yeah, so actually, this has a lot more in common with the previous conversation we had about calories, right? Um, that's the way I like to look at it, right? Calories are the total amount of what you're going to be taking in. Training is the same thing, right? I like to go in and be like, okay, first, how much time do you actually have to do some training, right? And then from there, then the goal comes in, right? So there's one more thing before the goal is how much actual time, right, of training load can you actually do? And then from there we go, okay, what's your first goal, right? If you come to me and you have blood work that's out of whack, to the point where it's like, hey, you have a little bit of insulin resistance, you have a little bit of thyroid issues, they might not even be flagged, but they're not optimal, right?
So
Then
before you go there, that will be your number one step. If anyone comes to you like, "Hey, David, you know what I mean? I want to get a little bit better," and they clearly don't know what they want. Most of the time, it's like, "I want to look better," but then you go like, "Hey, let's check where you're at," because that would be
right.
step. Number one would be, can you even check your blood pressure and resting heart rate? If they don't, I'm like, okay, this is a low hanging fruit that we can both do without you spending too much time, resources. You can either go to your doctor tomorrow morning or to your local pharmacy, or more appropriate would be just buy a blood pressure monitor. You'll need it sooner or later in your life. And if not you, then all and somebody in your family will need it.
Yeah, yeah, and they're super affordable, super cheap, $20, right? Yeah, there's some metrics that we would want, right? In my case, most of the time when I do a first consultation for somebody, they have some blood work, so that's why I start there, right? Because if they're just wanting to get, most of the time it's always I want to look better, all the time, right? It's I want to look better, right? And so that requires probably losing some body fat, even if you're already semi-lean. It also probably means that muscle building is probably going to be prioritized to some degree, unless you tell me that you have a strength objective, right? You're wanting to compete in something that's strength related, or worst case scenario, you're not strong at all, right? Like you have a deficiency in training, right? Like you're 40 years old and you've only just recently started weight training, right? Like in the last year or two, then I would say we got to concentrate a little bit on strength. But all of those hinge on making sure that your hormones, right, your sex hormones are operating correctly, and that your thyroid hormones and metabolism hormones are operating correctly. Because if those are not, we're going to be spinning our wheels. We're going to be trying to push you uphill when it comes to fat loss, or when it comes to getting more strength or more muscle capabilities. Now, the act of trying to accomplish those things will move those markers positively. So don't get me wrong, just the act of engaging in that type of behavior is going to start to move those markers a little bit. You start weight training, sex hormones will probably react positively. But I always want to try to get the most out of the time that they're spending, right? And so if your markers are already low hanging, then we shift into more of a health focused training to start, right? It doesn't mean that's what we're going to do forever. But if you don't do it, then we might be doing it forever, right? And that's why I start with how much time do you actually have, right? So that we can be like, hey, if you only have 30, 40 minutes a day to be able to focus on training, then let's start with fixing health markers first. Low hanging fruit, aerobic capability, right? Like if you're if your aerobic
Definitely
capability,
going through the sequence of things. I've just spoke to somebody just a couple days ago, and the things that you mentioned about like, hey, we need to get you stronger first. People don't understand that how important it is to be able to lift before you go into hypertrophy phase instead of focusing on aesthetics before you can even lift any decent weight. Uh, so
yeah,
it's interesting, like the low hanging fruit, okay, getting your fitness up. How do you actually buy buys them into that. Because a lot of people will go like, dude, I've seen these 6, 12, 20-week transformations. I just want to do that. And what they don't see is probably 5, 16 years of training to get to the place where you can transform your body in 6, 12 weeks.
Yeah, yeah, and that's actually the conversation that we have, right? Like most of the time, most people come to me, they already kind of know a little bit about my athletic history and career, right? And I just, they just, look at my recent posts on Instagram or whatever of my recent training or the last even 2 years of training, and they're like, well, I want to be aesthetic, I want to have muscle and blah 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 and all of that. And I just tell them like, okay, well, just to give you a reference point, I'm holding probably about 30 pounds more muscle than I need. That's 10 years of training plus drug use, right? Like nobody's going to wake up in 6 weeks and put 10 pounds of muscle on them. I don't care who they are.
And what they take.
Right, yeah, they could take everything, literally. They could take everything, and in 6 weeks, they're not going to be 10 pounds of muscle on that person. So, yeah, we just have a real conversation about that, right? Like, that's the reality. The most, even if you were taking a lot of drugs, and I mean a couple grams of gear, and eating as much food as you can, and weight training every single day, and having an appropriate day off, in 6 weeks, maybe you put on, maybe, that's a big maybe, in that scenario, maybe you put on 6 pounds of muscle. And that's if you react really positively to training and to drugs, right?
And very insulin sensitive, so you got everything in place.
Right. Like everything that I just talked about right before, right? Your thyroid system is working appropriately. You're already very sensitive. You're already cardiovascularly fit so that you can train really hard all the time. All of those have to be in line. And in 6 weeks, you might gain 6 pounds of muscle tissue if you already have those checked off, right? Most people that come to a coach don't have half of those checked off, right? I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say, you're halfway there, right? So let's get you the rest of the way there so that you can do these types of things. And the first is almost always fixing some underlying health marker. And fixing is not really the right word, it's just improving it, right? It's most of the time, it is cardiovascular in nature so that you can train harder and recover from the type of training if you're already moving in that direction. If you're not even there, then it's definitely the first thing to improve, because if you're not cardiovascularly fit, you can't oxidize fat, right? It's in the word, right? If you
And I
cannot
also add that it's probably the easiest to improve as well.
yes, right. And almost always, again, this is the buy-in, right? Like people are like, okay, well, am I going to have to do like 40 minutes of cardio? I'm like, no, absolutely not. It starts with daily a 20-minute session, right? And then I go, and then they go, okay, well, do I got to go to the gym? I'm like, it can be simpler than that. And that goes back to our basic videos, right? Like, let's get outside and kill 3 or 4 birds with one stone, right? Let's get outside. At first, I don't even care if it's in the morning, but it's a bonus point if it's in the morning. It depends on their schedule. But I just want them outside, moving their body, getting cardiovascularly fit. At first, it's not going to be very much effort. Like just a brisk walk is going to get their heart rate elevated to the point where you're making some aerobic adaptations, right?
So
And
what you're
then,
talking about now is like habit stacking, which is basically
yeah,
get
absolutely.
them understands that you can save time by doing multiple things that are beneficial for you at the same exact time.
Exactly right, and that gets the ball rolling into habit stacking, right? Is yes, there's multiple habits there, but you're also getting multiple rewards, right? That's the whole point of habit stacking, right? And so in this case, right, habit stacking your aerobic fitness, doing it outside when you can, even if it's cold. In fact, if it's cold, you actually put more pressure on the aerobic fitness side of things and fat loss side of things. And if it's not cold, you're actually putting more emphasis on recovery from that training and the ability to produce more ATP. Like if you're doing it in a sunny environment, a warm environment, you're going to produce more ATP, you're going to blunt hunger more, and you're going to feel more energized after an aerobic training session. And that allows you to control calories better. So it always ends up being that they get fitter, right? More aerobically fit, and they end up losing body fat at a faster rate, slightly, for the same amount of calories that they're eating.
And would it be correctly to assume that they also kind of help themselves to fight off inflammation because they haven't trained very hard? Now they start doing this in a sunny environment, and if they do that by exposing their joints, they actually will suffer less from what we usually experience from people who just start working out, is from the sore elbows, sore knees, ankles, and so on and so forth, as long as they can get that skin exposed to sun.
Yep, absolutely. There's that. And then on top of that, there is the topology changes of the skin, right? And all that means is that when the sun or cold is interacting with your surfaces, it makes your blood flow differently. That will help with blood flow, so that means inflammation will be able to be dispersed more easily. Plus, you're moving, right, in a rhythmic fashion. You're not contracting muscles like in weight training. Like in weight training, you're actually suffocating muscles, right? When you make a contraction, there's no blood going in and out of that muscle. You're going to cut off the blood flow. But when you do a rhythmic type training, jogging, walking, elliptical, etc., you are also improving the lymph system of moving toxins and inflammation, right? We'll just call it everything. Everything that all the metabolic processes are moving some debris sometime to the lymph system. And those lymph systems are not pressurized, right? People don't understand that. If you don't move, your lymph system doesn't move things either, right? Think of it like one-way valves in a plastic bag. When you contract the muscle, there's a lymph system in that muscle or area, and it gets contracted and pushed upon, pushes the lymph through, and it's a one-way valve, so it doesn't let it back through. That's how the lymph system works. So we're doing a lot of things just by doing that. That can be done in 20 minutes, right? In 20 minutes a day. And then when I tell them that, they go, okay, well, I can do that for 20 minutes, right? Like that's,
And me and you, we both notice that if we eat and then go outside in the sun, then we also improve nitric oxide production, which is our brains just pop out everywhere.
yeah, absolutely. So then they start feeling good, right? That's the point of training for health, or doing some type of training that's for health. It's regenerative, it's restorative in nature, right? Plus, you're getting an adaptation because it's a training, right? And then once you get that going, right, like you just put that in place, you get it going for 2 or 3 weeks. 2 or 3 weeks later, the guy will notice, or girl, right, that their recovery of the weight training starts to improve. Right? Hey, I no longer need 3 minutes between sets to be able to push hard again. I can do it in 2 minutes or 90 minutes. Well, that immediately is helpful because now you can do more work for the same amount of time that you're going to go in to the gym, right? And go back to my very first question with them is, how much time do you actually have to dedicate to the training? Most people are going to be very busy, right? Either they have a 9 to 5, or they're, in our case, most of the people we work with, they're, have 2 or 3 businesses where they're very busy taking phone calls, taking meetings, etc.
Driving around, lots of office meetings.
Yeah. But every now and then, right? Every now and then I go, I know you can get 30 minutes somewhere, right? And then, if that means, hey, in 30 minutes we can get a full body weight training session in, you're going to need to be very fit to be able to elicit enough damage to the body in 30 minutes and still recover from it, right? And so that's the goal of the aerobic training, is to eventually get to the point where you need very little rest between sets, so that you can, something like as little as 60 seconds to as much as 2 minutes at the most between sets, to be able to just elicit the response again. And that is when you can start really pushing training in your favor in very short periods of time. It fits really well for normal people with busy schedules and for entrepreneurs with busy schedules.
So before you go there with recovery and rest and whatnot, so 2 minutes would be like my cutoff period as well. It's like, dude, you're not trying to be world's strongest man. You don't need rest for 5 minutes.
Right.
If you
Right.
want to be an elite strength athlete, you might need a little bit more rest if you are extremely large individual. So where does this transition from health into strength into aesthetics happen? And you should also mention in the beginning, like if you are not strong at all, maybe you need to spend some time there. How does strength training differ to training for health? You just
Right.
described that health training for health will be, let's check your blood markers, whatever the health markers you want to check, blood pressure, resting heart rate, HRV, whatever. Let's improve those slightly so you can improve more efficiently. So now, how does strength training differ from training for aesthetics and looks or bodybuilding style hypertrophy training?
Right.
Begins
Right.
there.
This comes down just like
Why is
calories.
it important? Why getting stronger might be the missing piece?
Yeah. So getting stronger. Well, to unpack that, let's put it this way: training, just like calories, has specific inputs, right? Nobody really talks about these. They just name them broadly, like you did, right? Which is strength, hypertrophy, or aesthetics. But just like in calories, there's carbohydrates, macro proteins, and fats, right? The macronutrients. The thing that overwhelms each bolus of food is also just like I like to do training. What is the stimulus of that training, right? So if it's strength related, we'll talk about that because that's the thing that most people are going to be lacking if they haven't trained for very long, or if they just haven't really been dedicated to the weight training game very much. And it goes as follows: getting stronger involves two things. Number one, moving load progressively. It does not mean always working up to a heavy weight. It means from month to month, you are moving slightly heavier loads. But in there, right, each weight training session inside of there needs to capitalize on two things: the technical aspect of moving load from A to B, right? And that can be done with much lighter weights than most people think. And the intensity that you're bringing to the movement, right? And that actually carries over to the aesthetic side of things and the hypertrophy side of things, because muscles don't actually care what the load is to a certain degree when it comes to hypertrophy and aesthetics. They care about the amount of tension that the muscle is sensing. So you can use very low loads. A band, for example, is zero load, right? Like that's not going to hurt you at all. But you can create a lot of tension with that, but you need to develop a connection with your brain to be able to force enough electrical current to those muscles. You need to innervate them really hard. Strength training is the easiest way to teach somebody that to grind, right? Like in the weight training game, that's kind of what we call it, right? You need to be able to really focus your whole brain on just contracting the muscles that are doing the work. And I like to do that with lower sets and lower reps and higher sets. Something like 3 to 4 reps, right? But we progressively just add weight to it until you get to the end of like set 5 or 6, where all of a sudden the weight is moderately heavy, but you've already been taxed from all the sets, right? And so you have to work really hard and be very focused on what you're doing to create all that tension, right? And move the weight. That's the basics of strength training, right? And then there is slowing the reps down, right? Like just doing pauses at certain parts so that you actually have to really focus on keeping all that tension in the muscles that you want. You can even focus this to isolation movements, right? Like biceps, right? Like doing like partial rep biceps where you're actively contracting in certain partials and focusing on holding the tension in the bicep. It's no different than that when it comes to strength training. And you evolve that over time, and eventually you're moving heavier and heavier weight from month to month to month. That's strength training. That's actually kind of boring for most people, right? Like most people get fed up with that, but it is necessary if you're in the weight training or a strength training game, like you are trying to be competitive. You kind of know that that's what's going to happen.
And I
If
find
you're
it's not just boring, it's they don't see immediate rewards because you don't get any pump most of the time. You just get very tired by the end of it. And like you described, more often than not, you don't really lift anything that heavy as you mentally know you can. So it kind of holds you back from like, why am I wasting my time? I see it over and over and over again with guys that I hold back. Literally, I keep them at like 65, 70% of their max.
Yeah,
And I don't let them lift anything heavier for like 3 months. And they just get mentally so annoyed. And when I let them loose, they usually bypass their PBs by 20%.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I went from 300 kilo deadlift to 390. I'm like, because you listened.
Yeah, exactly, right. And that's the key, right? Like training for max load or strength, right? It takes a lot out of you when you actually move the maximum that you can or close to it, right? When you're moving 90% or more, it takes a lot out of you. It takes a lot out of you, especially once you get really strong, right? When you get really strong, you're probably only going to be able to do that per movement maybe once a week. If you're really strong and really big, you might only be able to do one movement at 90% or greater per week, right? So if you have 3 movements you're trying to elicit strength in, it's going to be 3 weeks before you actually go through all 3 movements at a high 90% or more max, right? But that's not training for strength. That's what I call practicing for strength, right? You're actually displaying.
And I think what you describe is probably a distinction should be made that you can probably lift really heavy every single week, but you're not going to make any progress anymore if you do so.
Correct. At that point, you're honing in the technical aspect of moving that heavy load, right?
Right.
This is more geared now. The conversation we're having is more geared for people that are already strength athletes. They know about this. They'll understand about powerlifters, strongman, etc. For the normal population, I almost never get to this point because they don't ever really need to display it, right? At that point, they're like, like you mentioned, they're working at 65 to 70% of their maximum, right? And that's going up month by month. And then 3, 4 months later, they're already lifting weights for their working sets that they never have lifted in their whole life. And they're ecstatic. And so it's never worth the risk to push it to 90% or more. But yeah, once you get into that, you're right, that you're competitive at that point. And so that is the major component of the training sessions, right? In 30 minutes, you're basically going to work 2 movements at the most, right? Because you're going to be working up in all these successions and lots of sets and everything like that. But in 30 minutes, you can elicit a lot of response for the strength outcome. You can do that 2 days out of the week, right? For certain movements that you want strength in. And then the other 2 days of the week, you focus on just not neglecting the rest of the body. That would be a proper strength focused program, even for somebody that has very low, somebody who's not strong, right? Somebody who's 45 years old and underdeveloped and can't even really do very much with themselves, like their own body weight, right? They can't do a pull-up. They can't do more than 20 push-ups. I'm like, yeah, you just need to be stronger, right? And so at that point, we do some basic movements that they're not going to hurt them. We focus on the strength component of those movements, and then the rest of the time is more metabolically demanding, so that they can continue to improve their body composition, right? Now,
Yes,
once they
let's dig into the aesthetics aspect, because everything you explain now, anything will make you healthier, but it's better if you get your health sorted before you move into strength training and aesthetics trainings and whatnot. Like, we both kind of agree that, hey, it's better to get a little bit stronger before you start moving into something else, because if you do, it gives you immediate reward in sense of like, God, I'm way more capable than I was before.
Mhm.
And now, if you can lift heavier loads, you have that understanding how you need to feel. You are safer to train for hypertrophy. Or is
Mhm.
that how you would
Yeah,
develop one for somebody?
yeah, yeah. And so then the next step, right? Because if they're not going to be competitive at anything, there's no point in damaging joints unnecessarily and tendons and ligaments. So at that point, whenever they get a baseline level of strength, then we go, okay, now let's move into a hypertrophy, more focused session or things of that
And
nature.
sorry for interrupting you, but there are websites where you can check how you compare to the rest of the population on the planet, aren't there?
Oh yeah, absolutely, right. If you
You
there's
want
base,
you get your ego checked, how much stronger you need to get, you just go on one of those websites.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like, okay, I'm very far off, or like, oh, I'm not doing that bad already. Let's just do some bicep curls now.
yeah, exactly, right. And so once you develop a baseline level of strength, and it's honestly not that high, right? We're talking, bench pressing 200 pounds is like really good, and
One
technically it
percent of the
is.
planet.
Yeah. It technically is for the general population. And at that point, you possess enough strength and you possess enough capability to move yourself, right? And so at that point, then we start going with very low risk movements that you can do a lot of volume with, but you have more control and you can elicit more targeted tension to the muscles. A bicep curl, for example, right? Going with some dumbbell curls, and you just, go, okay, I want you to do these very strict. And every time you contract, I want you to focus on contracting the bicep and moving that all the way through and keeping the tension in the bicep, right? Just like if in the strength training phase, if you were doing a lot of pauses or a lot of tempo work, same concept. But now you're doing it with isolation movements, right? And that means you're going to check your ego. You're not going to be lifting, a 50-pound dumbbell. You're going to be lifting a 15-pound dumbbell or a 20-pound dumbbell. But you're going to be getting a lot of tension response in that muscle. Now, hypertrophy, I like to view it as we are intentionally trying to suffocate the muscles. That's the way I like to describe it. Your intention, because that creates a response to store more energy in that muscle tissue locally. That's what's going to give you the rounder, fuller muscle bellies, etc. And the more you do that, the volume, right? So that's sets and reps. The more that response will be.
And I
You
think that's
titrate.
great the way how you describe it, because now you make a distinction between strength training, moving load from A to B, hypertrophy training, suffocating your body so it actually can tolerate more load later on and store more nutrients for the higher intensity work and so on.
Yeah. And again, this goes back to the mitochondria. When you suffocate the mitochondria, or the cells in that tissue, right? Let's just talk about the bicep. Then the bicep is forced, right? Because remember, when you're keeping tension on the bicep or any muscle, there's no blood leaving or entering that muscle. It's all whatever's in there, right? And so over time, if you do that long enough sets, enough volume, then the muscle itself, the cells in that muscle go, hey, we need to store a lot more fuel in here than we normally do, because this guy tends to not let us get blood flow appropriately when we do work. So we need to store it more locally. That makes the muscle swell up a lot more than it would normally, right? This isn't muscle tissue. This is everything else that's in the muscle. This is the water, this is the electrolytes, this is the carbohydrates, all of that type of stuff. And that means that now you can work that muscle harder, right? Because now there's more hydration, more nutrients in that muscle tissue locally all the time. And then that allows you to do more sets, more reps, and that feeds back, right? It's a continuous feedback loop at that point, once you've mastered that skill. And that's the basic template of hypertrophy. At that point, so then it becomes, if you're really fit and you're decently strong, now you can do set after set after set after set in a very small compressed window. You could even do 3-minute long sets, right? Like, hey, the goal is for 3 minutes, you're going to do bicep curls for the full 3 minutes, right? And at that point, that's one set, and you're probably done. At that point, you've exhausted most of the energy in that bicep, and maybe you can do it one more time, and that will be about it, right? And so there you go. In less than 10 minutes, you've trained your biceps to the full capacity. You can start doing that to other muscle groups, et cetera, and you start compressing the window of how much time you spend in the gym.
And it's more of a like Miloš Sarcev's approach of training, whereas a lot of people, especially guys, they will buy into the concept of let's train at high intensity the way Dorian Yates trained. And I usually try to bring them up. Like, I'm not being funny. Dorian Yates was an exceptional athlete. He was exceptionally fit to begin with. In his autobiography, you can read that he used to run 12 miles if he wanted to. And he was extremely technically sound, strong, and also retired early because of injuries.
Right.
You want to beat your body up by the age of 30 and not be able to live for the rest of your life? Probably not. So different goals, different strategies. So what you describe now is definitely what Miloš Sarcev does a lot. It prevents you from getting yourself hurt, saves you a lot of time. But let's dig into one concept that we both agree on. You're going to look good no matter how you train if you train hard.
Exactly right. And that's what I was going to reference. The Dorian Yates versus the other training paradigm is, at the end, they're both going to result. Like, if you do it long enough, they're both going to result in a physique that looks fantastic. The consequences of that have to do with what was the primary stimulus within the training, right? Was it mainly really high intensity, really high loads, or was it enough volume to really just push the hypertrophy side of things? Which means when you stop doing both of those are the stimuluses that go away, right? So you'll no longer be very strong if you stop eliciting high intensity, high load work, but you'll still probably look pretty damn good. The muscle is there, is what I'm getting at, right? In both of those concepts, for the most part, because let's face it, none of these are going to happen in 1 year, right? You're not going to, just like I said, even a really drugged up person is not putting on 10 pounds in 6 weeks. More realistically, if you're not taking any drugs and you're natural and you're a normal person, you're lucky to put on 10 pounds in the whole year, right? And so at that point, 2 years of that, yeah, you're going to look different. And at that point, both training strategies created those 10 to 15 pounds that make you look really good.
So what you describe now, training for health, strength, hypertrophy, all those kind of things, they come and go. I like to plan them different throughout the year. What about training to improve your cognitive abilities? Because myself and you, we throw in exercises that we kind of do a couple throws or so on and so forth. And we know that if you do it before some kind of seminar or whatnot, it can actually improve your sharpness of the brain decision making.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
is there something that, let's say, some kind of exceptional business owner can do before a meeting with potential partner or something like that, that can sharpens the brain.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that activates proprioception or the ability of your body moving through space, right? Now you can layer this into your training already with like body weight movements, like push-ups, pull-ups, lunges, anything where your brain now has to coordinate the contraction of your muscles plus moving your body through space. Because now it has to actually intertwine everything internal with everything external, right? Now, weight training kind of does that, but it does it in a static way. Your feet never move, right? Your body, your brain does not interpret that you are moving through space. That is the key component that makes this what you just described of kind of amping up the nervous system, and really what it is dopaminergic activity, because it's about patterns, right? And so one of the best things that you can do is if you're upper body dominant, I like throws. But if most people aren't necessarily upper body dominant, most people are just kind of neutral. So I like jumps, right? I like jumps. I like being able to jump and change direction. That's a very, very good one. So you jump to the front and then switch, jump to the side, right? Or
So now
side
everyone
jumps.
who works with me understands why I ask them to do lateral hops.
Correct, right, because you jump forward, you jump to the side. Now the brain had to register that there was a change in the motion of the body moving, plus coordinating all the muscles they got to contract with that. That immediately requires a lot more dopamine because your brain has to set up a pattern system to be able to fire the muscles in the correct sequence, right? And everybody knows that as you get older, dopamine is the thing that keeps the brain young, right? Like that's the thing that goes wrong with Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's and things of that nature is the dopaminergic and neurotransmitters, right? So eliciting a training response, right? So now those types of training, plyometrics, jumping, throwing, etc., the how would I say, the macronutrient that they are composed of is this neurological drive coordination thing that we're talking about. In the strength training, the macronutrient that's in there is high tension of muscles moving through space. In the hypertrophy training, the macronutrient is deoxygenating tissues and innervating them. You see what I'm saying? That's why I said it's very relatable to calories, because if you think about it, the stimulus as a macronutrient, the dominant macronutrient is the one that's going to elicit the response for after the training, right? Like what is it going to actually display? The jumps, the plyometrics are a really great example. People kind of catch on is when you do those types of things, you feel mentally more sharp because your brain has had to start to ramp up its production and coordination of all these things, which also means that when you're thinking complex tasks or decision making, those neurotransmitters are upregulated. You're going to think faster. You're going to execute decisions faster and more easily. So it's a very big benefit to incorporate some of that into your training. And I do that as part of my warm-ups, irrelevant of whether we're doing strength training or hypertrophy training. We start or end with some type of neurological plyometric type stuff. Not every single session, but they're layered in there.
Again, habit stacking, you know what works, you know how to execute that. And also if you don't do that religiously, you kind of lose it very fast.
Yeah, that component, yes, that component you do lose it very fast because it's not really dependent on energy, right? It's neurological drive in nature. It's neurons firing, it's dopamine, and all of these types of things, adrenaline, noradrenaline. Those can all be acutely made, right?
I always describe if you want to get fitter, healthier, and to me, like I don't need to get any stronger or bigger. To me, is how long can I stay exactly the same? That's the progress for me. And the only simple strategy that I can describe it to get there is eat like an adult, train like a child. Can you
Yeah,
move
that's
like a kid and make sure you eat consciously things that you know are good for you instead of just being reactive and just grabbing snacks and like like kid who can't control themselves. They see the snacks, they need it. Like you're not a child anymore.
mhm.
Eat the chicken. Or you know what I mean? When you're training, stop training
Yeah,
like a bodybuilder if you want to be fit and healthy because they are the most stiff human beings out there.
yeah, a lot of them.
Do some jumps, do some single leg squats. Just a couple days ago, I put on my Instagram doing pistol squats, and people go like, "How can you do that?" I'm like, "Because I've done it all my life. I never stopped doing that. I didn't start doing it now.
Right.
It didn't happen out of nowhere."
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really great description, right? Just being a child, right? Like you jump around a little bit, you exert yourself, you do some, another thing, another really beneficial thing, right? When it comes to, once you get good at like jumping, jumping, throwing, the plyometric type stuff, sprinting is very, very good. But again, you don't start sprinting. You uh, develop the ability to sprint, right? Because you can't hurt yourself there. That's like that would be considered, in my opinion, very high end plyometrics. At that point, you're eliciting full force into the ground through one leg at a time as fast as possible, right? That is the highest amount of plyometric activity that you're going to ever make as a human being. And so you're working your way up to that, right? And that's where these plyometrics allow for that.
And this
Doing
is
it.
this exact reason is why I always say people who give me they almost use it as an excuse. Yeah, but I have kids. I'm like, you have an unfair advantage now over everyone else because you can use them as your cardio equipment. Like, go and play with your kid.
Yeah, run around, right? Like chase them around. You're going to elicit all of these things, like the plyometric things. Like I find them kind of fun, right? I find them kind of fun, right? Like you warm up, yeah, you're going to get a little bit exhausted, especially if you've never done them. But when my kids see me doing them, guess what? The first thing they want to do? They want to do the same thing. They want they want to be jumping around, and next thing you know, it turns into a game for them, right? It's not really. And when you understand that, then most plyometrics, most things that we're talking about in that nature that are going to elicit a big neurological response are things that are actually kind of fun when you forget that you're an adult, right? And you think about it as a child.
Yeah. No, David, I think it's a great video as usual. Thank you for your time, and I'll catch you in next video.
Awesome. Thank you very much.